House File 29, Social Studies Standards Adoption suspended and review cycle modified, Ethnic Studies requirements repealed, and Ethnic Studies appropriations canceled. Members, our first bill is House File 29. Representative Kresha, welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and introduce your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Kresha. And so, Madam Chair, members, I have House File 29 in front of you. We are a state at risk. The students in Minnesota deserve the fundamental right to a quality education measured with academic success. Every catastrophic failure stems from a chain of bad decisions and policies contributing to the ultimate collapse. Members, the academic achievements in Minnesota are abysmal. For example, beginning in 2018, fourth grade student scores began trending down, and in 2022, these scores fell below the national average. Additionally, gaps on standardized test scores are similarly large and continue to increase. Low-income students significantly trail high-income students across Minnesota. These are not results Minnesotans should be proud of. This is an embarrassing failure. Bad news doesn't get better with time. Problems need to be addressed. Despite the fact that 29% of Minnesota 8th grade students failed to demonstrate a minimum level of reading ability, extraneous burdens were added to the schools that didn't address the failing academic achievement. In order to put academic achievement problem front and center, we must remove the distractions. Members, House File 29 delays the proposed social studies standard implementation to 2031 and repeals the requirement to embed ethnic studies as defined in 120B.25 into all required academic standards. That's right. The current law requires ethnic studies to be embedded in things like physical education standards. 120B.25 states, and I quote, "Ethnic studies analyzes the ways in which race and racism have been and continue to be social, cultural, and political forces, and the connection of race in the stratification of other groups, including stratification based on the protected classes." So while you're doing your physical education, these are the concepts that have to be embedded into that academic curriculum. The 8th graders who cannot read at grade level and the 4th grade students underperforming their national and international peers are not lacking education regarding social, cultural, and political forces. They are lacking fundamental academic achievement. Members, we need to ensure that students can read proficiently and confidently work through math and science problems presented in everyday life. I've read the submitted testimony and the cases for or against the ethnic studies mandate. The cases for the mandate stems from the premise that teaching cultural perspectives are beneficial to education and to the outcomes of students. But the premise employs a controlling tone suggesting that because some classrooms have had positive cultural experiences, all classrooms and all academic areas must adopt the curriculum, further suggesting some teachers are not teaching cultural perspectives acceptably. The arguments against the ethnic studies mandate suggest that academic achievement is a priority and that teachers understand the best way to get academic achievement is to meet students where they are at and use all the teaching methods available, including cultural perspectives. I am a teacher, and I have worked with many other teachers. Teachers want to succeed, and they wish their students to succeed. A good teacher will find any way to get to a student, but teaching is an art and a passion. The ethnic studies mandate suggests we as a state do not trust the expertise of our teachers. That is the wrong approach. We have to remove the burdens so teachers can work on fundamentals. We have to trust our teachers. Every student starts the day with a finite number of minutes to be successful. Mandates like the ethnic studies mandate steal time from students with prescribed and forced curriculum and ultimately sets them up to fail. With that, members and Madam Chair, I ask for your support, and I believe there's some testifiers for House File 29.
Thank you, Chair Kresha. And actually, I don't believe we moved your bill, so I'm going to move it right now. The chair moves that House File 29 be re-referred to the Committee on Education Finance. So thank you, Chair Kresha. We do have several testifiers today. So I'm going to call the testifiers up two at a time and then announce the next two on deck so you can be ready. I will remind each of you to keep your comments to 2 minutes. We will be keeping time. Mr. Pilon has some flashcards here. He's going to give you a 30-second warning, so kind of keep your eye on him, and then time at 2 minutes. Let's see, I will also remind testifier or members that We have handouts with comments for those who are not able to join us today. Those handouts are in your folders. And I'm going to remind each testifier to first identify yourself and any organization you might represent, and then proceed as I recognize you. So we will start with Catherine Kirsten and Dieta Moose, and excuse me if I mispronounce your name, mispronounce the word mispronounce too. And then on deck, we have Mark Westfall and Crystal Johnson. So we'll start with Catherine.
Thank you.
And again, watch the time cards up here. So go ahead and proceed, Catherine.
Madam Chair, I am Catherine Kirsten. I'm a Senior Policy Fellow at Center of the American Experiment, and I'm testifying today in support of House File 29. Minnesota policymakers have entrenched liberated ethnic studies ideology in every grade and academic subject in our state's public schools. They sold ethnic studies as promoting racial understanding, something that all kind, empathetic Minnesotans should support. But from the beginning, MDE and bill authors knowingly gave power to design and lead the new ethnic studies regime to political advocacy groups that intend to remake our schools and our state by replacing academic instruction with K-12 education centered on activism, resistance, and race and power analysis starting in kindergarten. Now, MDE's hand-picked Ethnic Studies Working Group has completed its 62-page framework for implementing ethnic studies across our state. It's a product of members and allies of the Minnesota Ethnic Studies Coalition, whose leader, Brian Lazinski, a primary framework author, has called in an interview for the overthrow of the U.S. government. Here's what our students will be learning under the framework, and I'm quoting. Third graders will study solidarity movements like the Third World Liberation Front and the Delano Grape Strike and create protest dances of resistance. Sixth graders will learn about Black Power as resistance, explore George Floyd Square, and drive around the Twin Cities looking at murals combating racism. Ninth graders will study lynchings in Duluth in 1920. The framework portrays Minnesota as Alabama in the 1930s, and students learn nothing about America's civil rights laws in the framework. Teachers must undergo intrusive, cult-like professional development as a condition of employment. They'll be pressured to continuously, I'm quoting, reflect on my identities and relationships to structure and power and develop the tools to challenge white supremacy. Minnesota's new authoritarian ethnic studies regime is a disastrous mistake. It will profoundly damage students of all backgrounds. Back home in your district, how will you explain to parents you didn't correct course on this travesty when you had the opportunity to do so? I urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dieta Moose.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Bennett, members of the House Education Policy Committee. My name is Dieta Moose, and I'm a public school board member. I'm speaking on my own behalf. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk on the Ethnic Studies Standard in its current state. I attended most of the in-person Ethnic Studies workgroup sessions as a public observer last summer. I was there as a public observer, hoping to gain a better understanding of the process and the perspective of the work of the group. And in participating in this way could also help inform my recommendation to the commissioner once public comment was requested. The work group met monthly at MDE from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., and they met as a large group for the first half hour and last half hour of the day. The rest of their time was spent on their assigned committees. During these full-day committees, I was only allowed to view the work of the group as they met together for the first half hour and last half hour of the day. No public was allowed to attend any of the breakout committees. I could not understand why discussions around a standard promoting inclusivity with the intention of placing them in front of K-12 children in our state's public and charter schools would be done in secret. During the final hour of the last public group meeting, many members of the work group expressed concern that their work seemed incomplete. A concern was also expressed in an earlier large group session that the recommendation was too narrow and not reflective of their wide variety of communities, and that there should have been a broader spectrum of perspectives included in the work group so a more inclusive and comprehensive product could have been attained. The work group was not in full agreement with their final product. My largest concern is in regards to the massive amount of professional development time that will be required to train our already overextended teachers and staff. Many schools are still working on teacher training to meet the requirements of the READ Act, and our school systems are not in a position to devote more time to additional professional development requirements. I was here at the Capitol with a few superintendents a few days ago, and one of their messages to the legislators was this: I've been a superintendent for over 18 years. I have never felt as far away from my students as I have these last 2 years. We have placed too much on the plates of our educators. Please allow us to focus our efforts and get back to the business of educating. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And next up, we have Mark Westfall and Crystal Johnson. And then on deck, we have Kendall Qualls and Hillary Swanson. So we'll start with Mr. Westfall. Go ahead and state your
Hello,
name.
Madam Chair. My name is Mark Westfall. I am the president of the Minnesota Council for the Social Studies. The academic framework for this bill has cross-cultural understanding while simultaneously allowing students to recognize accomplishments and historic contributions of more ethnic groups, not just a singular European aspect. I was 11 years old in 1990, the same age as my youngest students now. Our state demographics were about 94.5% Caucasian. Right now, we're currently at 64% Caucasian. That's an opportunity for us to be able to reach more of our own students that look different from the stereotypical imagination throughout the nation of what I look like as a typical Minnesotan. I'm going to deviate a little bit from my written notes because they'd be 7.5 minutes long, so I will be submitting those to the secretary later. What I do want to really project, though, is that as social studies educators, we have been equipped through academic training and ongoing professional development to recognize the importance of presenting a truthful and comprehensive account of history. This account analyzing historical events through primary sources and multiple perspectives, it's essential to encourage inquiry for the reasons behind the preservation or the absence of certain narratives. We must continue to provide students with opportunities to engage and be objective in critical examination of history, enabling them to make well-informed decisions regarding enduring historic events. What was the time at, sir? 30 seconds. We do have opportunities as social studies teachers throughout our state and throughout our country to be able to get professional development. A lot of those opportunities stem right from our school districts. I do take a little bit of concern with the last comments as a former school board member myself. I do know that we offer those opportunities within our districts and offer opportunities throughout the entire state and nation. Again, I will be submitting more evidence-based research on all those things. Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you, and Ms. Johnson.
Hello, my name is Crystal Johnson. I speak from many perspectives here today. I am a current teacher of social studies. I am a member of the committee that drafted the social studies standards in question. And perhaps most importantly, I'm a mother of 3 school-aged and younger children. And for years, I've dedicated my time in advancing social studies education here in Minnesota. These standards must be implemented because they reflect rigorous, inclusive, and a transparent process designed to meet the needs of our students and communities today. From my time on the Social Studies Standards Committee, I can say that these standards were written with a variety of stakeholders throughout the state in mind. The committee operated on a volunteer basis, which was open to anyone in the state of Minnesota to apply and become a part of. And this work shared a common mission, which was to ensure that social studies would be equitable to the many groups of students reflected in our great state. We received public feedback on our drafts and worked to make sure our ongoing work on the standards reflected the feedback of individuals and stakeholders across the state. We also received death threats. We also received so much public feedback that was not beneficial to our work, threatening the members on our board to the point where our committee reduced in number because people feared for their own personal and family safety. I received messages to my personal communication phone during committee meetings that targeted me specifically. And this was all publicly broadcasted on YouTube, available and open to the public. Beyond my professional experience as a mother, I wholeheartedly support these standards for my own children. I embrace the diversity and perspective offered, both in the social studies standards and ethnic strands. And my 6-year-old son will be entering into 3rd grade at the time these new standards are due to be implemented. And I would like to leave you with an excerpt of something he will learn in the civics strand. Analyze how public policy is shaped by governmental and non-governmental institutions. Identify a local public problem and describe ways which individuals and groups can take informed action to influence decision makers to make a difference in the civic lives of their communities. I love this standard because, as I'm doing so right now and speaking to you, our students will learn the many ways that they can be involved in the democratic process of shaping our government and causes that are important to them. Like you said, Mr. Kresha, trust your teachers, and that is me. I urge you to please support the implementation of these standards for the benefit of all Minnesota students. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Kendall Qualls and Hillary Swanson, and then on deck, Marcus Penny and Grath Wall. We'll start with Mr. Qualls.
Thank you for the invitation. We've got a full room here, so I had to come from the lobby.
Well, thank you for being here, and go ahead and proceed and introduce yourself and start.
Sure, my name is Kendall Qualls, here as a private citizen. I'm a resident of Medina, and thank you for inviting me. I've actually testified before a different committee last year on this topic and recommended for it not to be passed. Let me give you an idea. This is a Trojan horse masquerading as advocating for diversity, and it's nothing more than a socialist and Marxist agenda. Using black people, once again, to advance an agenda that does nothing to benefit children of color or any American children at all. It's a sham in the making. And let me just tell you really about Black history and ethnic studies. There is a House representative in the state of Alabama, black man, that ran on school choice and school initiative, first black man to be elected in the State House of Alabama in 140 years. There's a black woman in the state of Georgia that changed from being a Democrat to a Republican because only 3% of her students in her district could read at grade level. First black woman to be elected as a Republican in the state of Georgia's history. We're being used to advance an agenda that has nothing to do with ethnic studies or diversity. We're being used. And I'm going to tell you, black people across this country, including the state of Minnesota, has waken up to the sham, and you're going to pay for supporting this issue in the black community. That's true ethnic studies, and you're going to face it at the polls in the next election. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, is it 3 minutes or 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Thank you.
And you'll have cards to watch for a 30-second.
My name is Hillary Swanson. I'm from Apple Valley. I have a student in the public school system. The bill has language advising a long-term plan to be implemented to include addressing issues of institutional racism experienced by students of color or who are American Indian, which includes policies and practices that intentionally or unintentionally result in disparate discipline referrals and suspensions. I wonder if any of you remember SPPS teacher Aaron Benner. In 2014 and 2015, he highlighted the fact that schools were placing disruptive students back into classrooms and crippling Black children by not holding them to the same expectations as other students. He won his lawsuit. The school claimed they did not retaliate against him. You set students up for failure when you have different racial behavior guidelines. The statement, institutional racism experienced by students of color or American Indian, it leaves out white students. Wow, talk about inequitable. Sounds like white privilege to me. A section of this bill states, the plan must include strategies to validate, affirm, embrace, and integrate cultural and community strengths of all students, families, and employees in the district's curriculum. It seems innocuous, but this section embodies ethnic studies and stratification of students by race. The culture of a school is made up of qualities like excellence, leadership, collaboration, respect, innovation, passion. Many parts of this bill diminish children to what they look like
and does not encourage the elevation of character. For it is good character that promotes good culture in our places of learning. Reducing disparities in academic achievement and providing equitable access to effective teachers who encourage critical thinking is a worthy endeavor. But imagining disparities are caused by racism and ignoring the basics of providing a quality education and instead propping up social engineering has been the downfall of education for all students, including Black and American Indian students. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Swanson. Next up, we have Marcus Penny and Grathwall, and then on deck, Karen Miller and Courtney Major. We'll start with Mr. Penny. Go ahead and introduce yourself and begin.
Thank you, Chair, members. My name is Marcus Penny, and I am the Communications Manager at Education Evolving, a Minnesota nonprofit advocating for student-centered learning. I'm also dad to 2 Minnesota public school students and a graduate of Waseca Public Schools some decades ago. House File 29 would discard Minnesota's revised social studies standards, nullifying the voices of Minnesotans who weighed in during the 4-year statutory process to craft them. Why? Some argue the standards pit groups of students against each other, casting people of color as the victim, white people as the villain. But under the standards, first graders like my son would identify examples of how people care for each other as they work for change in communities. 9-year-olds like my daughter would identify how various groups have advocated for self-determination. These standards are not about blame, they are about empowerment. The standards do ask students to consider many sources to understand the roots of contemporary systems of oppression and apply lessons from the past. One could hear that and say, there it is. They're teaching kids that America is hopelessly racist. That misses the forest for the trees. What the standards emphasize is student inquiry, questions, not answers. The standards are built on a widely respected research-based student inquiry framework, C3, adopted by red and blue states alike. Through inquiry, students analyze the past by considering competing perspectives, contradictory evidence, incomplete historical records. They learn, how to think critically, not what to think. Some still warn this will foster a generation of anti-American activists. But this is activism, what I'm doing right now. Showing up, speaking out. That's not anti-American, but deep, enduring patriotism. A civic skill and an American ideal our students deserve to learn. I urge you to reject House File 29. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, maybe refrain from clapping, please, so we can keep moving. Mr. Wall.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Jim Grathwell. I represent the St. Paul Public Schools. Thank you for bringing this bill forward, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be very brief. St. Paul Public Schools strongly supports the ethnic studies provisions here. My superintendent, Joe Gothard, testified in favor of this last year. I was taught and read some Aristotle in my college years. Aristotle said, we perfect ourselves in relationship. We perfect ourselves in relationship means we know ourselves, we get to know ourselves better in relationship, which is kind of what we're doing here today. But if you've ever been in a marriage, you know something about that. Ethnic studies helps my diverse group of students in the St. Paul Public Schools know and love each other better. They feel safer when their culture is seen. They feel known when it's recognized and celebrated. So I encourage you to keep this ethnic studies in the statute. Maybe give it a year, try it a little bit longer. We have found it to be very beneficial. And I just want to add, I'm also testifying on behalf for this one day, this 1 hour, this one moment of the Minneapolis Public Schools. So Minneapolis and St. Paul schools, public schools, who have both been doing this for some time, strongly support the current law and appreciate the debate. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up, we have Karen Miller and Courtney Major. And on deck, we will have Claude Sigmund and Diane Smith. And we'll start with Ms. Miller, if we could. Go ahead and introduce yourself and begin.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Karen Miller. I'm a wife, mother of 6, teacher, and author of Faith in Action. Even though I'm currently home educating our children, I choose to speak today because I care deeply about the entire generation they are growing up alongside. They are the future of America. In 2023, I testified in opposition to the ethnic studies requirement of HF 1269 because it would be taught through a lens of critical race theory. It teaches race and racism as a political force, along with other areas of stratification, such as gender identity. This is racial discrimination, which violates federal civil rights law. In essence, ethnic studies ushers the teaching of cultural Marxism into our classrooms, which will only serve to further divide our students and our society based on immutable characteristics. Surely we do not want to implement an ethnic studies standard that indoctrinates our students that they are forever trapped by their skin color to be inherently an oppressor or forever the oppressed. Let us teach the next generation the truth that each of us is part of one human race, just with differing levels of melanin. That despite our external differences and our past histories, we all have the same potential within to either become a noble instrument of what is just and good, or to become a cruel instrument of evil and vice. This is the heritage of every young American, that we can stand shoulder to shoulder, like the white person who realized that slavery was wrong and the person of color who longed to be free. Together, we can overcome the injustice of racial bias to claim the birthright of every American, that all are created equal and have the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Teaching ethnic studies through a lens of critical race theory will only deepen the divisions between us and enslave us all. Let us therefore choose to link arms and break free. I thank you for your support of HF 29.
Thank you for your testimony. And Ms. Major.
Thank you for having me here this afternoon. My name is Courtney Major, and I've been teaching social studies at the middle and high school levels in Minnesota for 23 years. I have participated in providing feedback for and subsequently implementing both the 2012 and the 2020 revisions of the state social studies standards. In 2021, I was asked by the Education Department at the Minnesota Historical Society to prepare professional development for teachers for the National Council of the Social Studies annual meeting. That presentation was entitled Minnesota's Ethnic and Cultural Diversity, Past and Present. I'm currently a proud member of the Social Studies Department at Edina High School, and I have 3 kids in 196. I'm here to testify against the bill, and I'm in favor of keeping the ethnic studies strand embedded in the Minnesota social studies standards. Representation matters. The ethnic studies strand in the social studies aims to ensure that the history of all of us is included in the Minnesota K-12 social studies curriculum. Ethnic studies emphasizes the actions of people from all ethnicities who refuse to be excluded from the promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Representation matters. Whether a student's immigrant history is connected to large waves of Europeans in the 100 years following our statehood, or connected to the post-1965 Immigration Act that opened access to the American dream for our Southeast Asian and African neighbors, all Minnesota students deserve the opportunity to see someone who looks like them participate in civic life and celebrate the contributions of people whose efforts compel us to live up to the promises of freedom and the ideals enshrined in our Constitution to create a more perfect union. Novelist George Orwell observed in his masterpiece, 1984, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the past controls the present." The truth is, our nation's past is complicated and sometimes contradictory. Removing the ethnic studies strand from the current social studies standards intentionally revokes opportunities for our students to fully examine the whole truth about who we are and implies that the history of some Minnesotans is more important than others. By denying access to the truth about the past in this present moment, we are not adequately preparing Minnesotans for the realities of the future. By striking ethnic studies strand from the current state standards and revoking institutional financial support, this committee would be complicit in hiding the truth from Minnesota students. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Claude Sigmund and Diane Smith. And on deck, we have Mike McCarthy and Adosh Uni. We will start with Claude Sigmund. Go ahead and introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you for having me here. I'd be remiss before I begin if I didn't say go Edina Hornets. They're playing tomorrow night, the women's hockey team. So here we go. My name is Claude Sigmund. I've been teaching since 1996, but have spent the last 26 years teaching 9-12 at the Edina Public Schools. The 2021 standards embrace the most current research by incorporating ethnic studies. Most people get race and ethnicity confused. Please don't. Research shows that students who participate in ethnic studies courses typically experience improved academic performance across all subjects. Higher graduation rates, particularly among students with diverse backgrounds, increasing critical thinking skills through exposure to multiple historical perspectives, enhanced engagement with courses material due to its relevance of their lived experiences. I believe those who argue against the inclusion of ethnic studies are not aware of what ethnic studies really is. So let's really examine what good teaching is and how these help our students. Good history means knowing the good and the bad, recognizing the gray areas and discussing the role of all groups, including men and women, African Americans, Native Americans, and other ethnic groups that also happen to look white. We need to know the glory of D-Day and celebrate that, but we also need to know about Japanese internment camps. We need to know about the massive benefit of the Navajo code talkers, but acknowledge the history of reservations. Yes, we need to identify the pain of our past and the racist actions from redlining to lynchings. This is what incorporating ethnicity into history actually means, seeing the multiple perspectives and how people of different ethnicities were impacted and involved in these events. The following quote is often wrongly attributed to British statesman Winston Churchill. The quote is more likely attributed to Spanish philosopher Jorge Santayana. That is, those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. I ask you, how do we keep ourselves from repeating history if we don't actually learn the history? Removing the ethnic studies standards like teaching only half of our history. Thank you for giving me time to present. Trust this teacher.
Thank you. Next, we have Diane Smith. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Bennett. My name is Diane Smith, and I'm a mother, and I've been a teacher for many, many years. And here's a history that everyone needs to learn. This is from She Van Fleet. It's called Mao's America. And if you want a little history lesson, everyone in this room needs to read this book. This book basically teaches about what I believe is going on behind the scenes today in our educational system. Little children are being told that our country is systemically racist. That means, folks, across the board, that everyone you basically encounter and come across has something against you if you don't look like them. These little children in her story, and she was one of them, was a child that grew up under Mao's rule in China. And basically, if you said anything against the status quo or, if you went against Mao, you were punished. And the parents who did not go along with this were turned in by their own children. So this might sound really off kilter here. That has nothing to do with what we are talking about. It has everything to do with what we are talking about. So if you want to learn history, please read Mao's America, A Survivor's Warning. She gives a warning, and she is out almost weekly talking about the horrors of what she went through and how this relates to this bill, that if we continue to push that America is systemically racist. Notice I said systemically. There is racism in every society, and there's nothing we're going to be able to do about some of the bad characters. But what we can do is elevate our children and tell them they are not identified because of what someone says they are. That is not their identity. Children are created by our loving God. They are individuals and not a part of a group. So I'm half Irish. You'd probably never guess that. I do not identify as Irish. And there could be a lot of cruel Irish jokes out there. I've heard them all. But I do not identify as that. I identify as a child of God and a very beautiful human being who loves everybody. And I have taught hundreds of children.
Wrap up here.
So my word to you, read Mao's America if you really want to know what's going on. And I appreciate you giving me the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Last, we have Mike McCarthy and Adosh Uni. We'll start with Mike McCarthy. If you go ahead and introduce yourself for the record and begin.
Good afternoon, I'm Mike McCarthy. I'm from Fixing Stillwater Schools, Stillwater, Minnesota, and I'm here to speak today in favor of HF 29 and its common sense pause and assessment so we can consider the importance of equality over equity, merit over DEI, and academics over indoctrination. Community members believing that we are all humans, men and women, deserving of equal treatment must not be marginalized and have our children taught beliefs contrary to their parents and their faith community. The underlying premise of the recent changes to our curriculum are flawed. They embed a progressive oppressor-oppressed worldview, culture, and values. The social political model is not only wrong, but its application in school is detrimental to the mental health, development, and future well-being of our children. In this worldview, one may self-identify as being part of one or more victim groups, and by doing so, the self-declared victims gain opportunity, voice, resources, and power over others accused of having privilege and the right to take retribution against those so accused. Today, we've heard a number of different things about we are safer when our culture is seen. And I'm picking up and displaying something in your packets, Madam Chair, that illustrates the race identity questions in the Minnesota Student Survey. You'll notice I've summarized this on this side are the ones that are 37 options, which are geographically based, like Benghazi, African American, Liberian, Puerto Rican, Iranian, and of those other, you get white or white privileged. There's no discussion, there's no opportunity to identify any culture or relationship to Irish, British, German, French, Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, Russian, Hungarian, Italian, etc. Just white. The unevenness is intended to educate, and it does. The sense that we were going to be equally treated, that all of our cultures would be acknowledged, is put to lie in that diagram. I hope you take a look at it. I've submitted additional written comments that outline some of the underlying philosophy and its errors, and I emphasize errors. It is wrong, and I look forward to follow-up contacts with the chair and number of members of the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Uni.
Good afternoon, Chair, members. My name is Adosh Uni. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Minnesota Department of Education, and I'm appreciative of the opportunity to provide some comments on HF 29 today. Specifically, MDE would like to express serious concerns with eliminating the current social studies academic standards. To achieve a well-rounded education, Minnesota requires academic standards to be revised every 10 years so that they reflect current research and best practices. The 2011 social studies standards reflected research and model standards that existed at that time. The 2021 social studies standards, which include ethnic studies, provide updates that reflect current research and allow and are tailored to provide an education that meets students' need to be career and college ready in today's world. As stated in formal documents during the successful rulemaking period, the Social Studies Committee followed a thorough process, carefully considered research and expert and public feedback, and incorporated statutory requirements into standards. Minnesota social studies standards are first fully implemented in 2026-2027 school year. Schools have invested significant staff time in alignment, including materials, textbooks, and professional development dollars. Since the standards were finalized and ruled just a year ago, leaving schools only 2 to 3 years to revise scope and sequence, schools have spent significant effort and funds this past 12 months to provide this education for their students and to be set up for success. Reverting to the 2011 social studies standards would not only reject the rigorous, required, and necessary 2021 review and revised standards, but it would also cause serious disruptions and costs to our schools and districts that are deep into implementation work on these important standards on behalf of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Uni. So members, we are going to, this concludes our list of testifiers, and public testimony is now closed. Thank you to everybody who testified. Members, do we have any questions or discussion? And just ask you to keep your comments concise and to the point of your question, please. But do we have any members? Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, my understanding is that there were a number of other people who signed up to do public testimony, and we typically offer time for members of the public to participate and add their testimony. I'm wondering if that is, I mean, you said the testimony is closed. Is there an opportunity for other people who might have come from other parts of the state to offer their testimony and support or in opposition to this bill?
Thank you. Good question. We did have this open for people to sign up for testimony. These are the ones that we had. We're the only ones who signed up for testimony.
I signed up and I didn't get to speak.
Okay. Do we have? So we have a number of people who signed up, but we don't have any record of that. So I guess, I mean, I would love to hear lots of testimony, but we do need to stick with our committee decorum of those who signed up.
Well, we did sign up. And there's a record.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'm
Go ahead.
happy to, my contact is public and everything is on the website. If anybody would like to reach out, my phone number is there, 651-296-4247, as well as on my email. I would love to take these conversations so that everyone has a chance to talk about the bill.
Okay. You know, what we'll do, Representative Kresha will open up testimony for another 15 minutes.
Okay.
We also do accept written testimony for anybody who doesn't get a chance to say anything. So we'll have another 15 minutes. Members, just understanding that that will shorten our member discussion a little bit. But so do we have, not quite sure how to. So go ahead and just, if you want to testify, you'll need to also sign up, I believe, with the page after you testify. So go ahead and sit down, then we'll just keep the other people on deck. And again, please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less, and we will have some cards, little flashcards, so keep your eyes up here. So I will start with you, if you just introduce yourself and begin.
My name is Coffee Monska. I'm a mom of 3. I grew up with a mom who was on drugs. When I was a kid, I lived in government housing in a 1-bedroom apartment. My mom, sister, and I shared a bed. When I was in junior high, my dad took us from her because he was worried about us moved to the burbs. But even then, I had challenges. A kid harassed me for months with racist jokes, like get to the back of the line and things like that. And eventually he burned my hand with the striker in science class that you can still see on my hand today. Despite all of this, from an early age, I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer and that nothing would stop me. Yet in college, I was given messages similar to those in this ethnic studies bill, that whites and systematic racism would hold me back. I began to doubt myself and to distrust all white people, including my friends. This type of teaching is psychological abuse and can cause people of color to question their sanity and perception of reality. It's what Musa Al-Garbi calls benevolent racism. Although there's good intent, it attributes virtually all agency and power to white people. This ethnic studies bill is an example of benevolent racism. In the exact language of the statute, it says that it analyzes ways in which race and racism has been and continue to be a cultural and political force, and it talks about the connection of race to the stratification of other groups. It says that people who look like me and my kids are at the bottom of this hierarchy. My son was at 3.8 GPAs in APA classes and calculus, all while playing sports and working is at the bottom of this hierarchy, and it doesn't make sense. In conclusion, people will say that they need to see themselves in the curriculum. No, they don't. They need to learn to read and write, and only half of Minnesota students are proficient in that. Education is emancipation. There's too many cultures and ethnicities to teach them all. Kids should learn their culture from their family and friends, and unfortunately, due to this curriculum that pits them against each other by race, this is less likely. I want people of color to know that they are not fragile and they're not stuck at the bottom of some caste system, and that they can achieve as I did.
Thank you. And next, go ahead and proceed with introducing yourself.
Hello, my name is Yao Buko, and I'm currently a senior at Highland Park Senior High. I believe I'm the youngest testifier thus far. So I am part of the first ever required ethnic studies class I'm the graduating class of 2025, and I'm honored to defend ethnic studies. Madam Chair and members of the community, it is your duty to reject the House File 29. To me and to so many others, ethnic studies is more than just a class. It's an opportunity and it creates community. It's not all these derogatory, pitting people against each other. It's wonderful. It helps students find their place in the world and it encourages young people to engender their futures. Ethnic studies gives us a voice. In my ethnic studies class, we talked about diverse histories, and for the first time ever in my education, I learned about somebody that looked like me. It was quite astonishing, and it taught me how to engage with my community. It taught me that I can sit here as a 17-year-old right here and talk to all these wonderful legislators. And this is why it sparks conversations that the opposition tries to bury. Knowledge of the past is worthless without action in the present. Without educated young people, we lose our connection and we lose our power and our futures. Denying ethnic studies silences the truth of our knowledge, and it no longer belongs to us. Those in power controls whose story is told and whose is erased. These censorship policies are creeping into society today, and we can't let that happen. Ethnic studies must stay. Somehow I grew up without knowing who Grace Lee Boggs was and who Cesar Chavez was. I was taught about crusaders and colonists like Christopher Columbus and George Washington instead. Ethnic studies is a lens in which we should all be taught through. Every student and every teacher should be able to engage with real history of this country, the good and the bad. When we ignore history, we don't just forget it, we repeat it. So I implore you, allow for the next generation to be taught more than the system has taught me. Please, ethnic studies must stay.
Thank you for being the youngest testifier. Appreciate that. Next, we have some others who are waiting. Go ahead and make your way to the chairs. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sina.
Go ahead, proceed.
Okay. Hello, my name is Sana Gobana. I'm a junior at Washington Tech, and I'm here to speak against passing the HF 29 bill. I myself have taken a handful of rigorous classes. However, none of them stood out like ethnic studies did. Ethnic studies provided me with numerous benefits, such as a deeper understanding of history, identity, and the world around me. This class has taught me to think critically and look at things from a different perspective. For students of color such as myself, ethnic studies represents more than a class. It's a space in which we are reflected. It's a space in which we are safe. It's a space where we can be ourselves. Removing ethnic studies sends a dangerous message to our students of color. It tells them that their history doesn't matter and only certain narratives deserve to be taught in the classroom. Let it be known that taking away ethnic studies does not erase history. If anything, it ensures that our students lack the tools to address the systemic issues of our nation. We should be trying to equip our students with these tools rather than restricting them from it. Removing funding for ethnic studies only creates a fractured community between our teachers, parents, and students. If you all are truly committed to providing Minnesota students with high-quality education, then programs like ethnic studies should not only be protected, but expanded in our schools. High-quality education does not silence the perspective of our students. Rather, it gives them a place to share with others. It challenges students to think critically and engage with complex history that is not taught in the traditional classroom. If we want to invest in the future leaders of this country, then ethnic studies must be a part of that vision. So I leave you all with this question. When are we going to acknowledge that our Black communities, our Asian communities, our Latino communities have all contributed to American history? Oh, and let's not forget about the Native Americans, the Ojibwe and the Dakota, who have all contributed to our American history. We need to learn about their fight, their resistance, and their liberation, because that is American history. I stand before you all, I'm sitting before you all to urge you all to listen to the voices of our students who have benefited from these programs. Please do not pass HF 29. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, and let's introduce yourself. And again, if we can please refrain from applause so we can just keep moving. I'd like to hear as many people as we're able. Go ahead and proceed.
Hello, my name is Angeline Patrick Pacheco, and I'm a student here in St. Paul. I took the class Critical Ethnic Studies in my 10th grade year of high school, and I felt so incredibly impacted by the course material being taught and also the conversations I had because of the class. Ethnic studies provides representation to students who otherwise don't see themselves in their education, and representation has been proven time and time again to be crucial to a student's success. One Johns Hopkins Studies University shows that how true this is when finding Black students are 13% more likely to go to college if they had at least one Black teacher by the time they entered 3rd grade. The percentage of Black students going to college more than doubles to 32% if they had even just 2 Black teachers in elementary school. Not only does ethnic studies provide the needed representation within classrooms, but it also fosters and helps develop critical thinking skills. These skills are imperative to future success, as critical thinkers are better able to acknowledge their personal limitations, are more skeptical of extreme views, are interested in others' ideas, and keep an open mind. Being able to grow these skills at a younger age would help students significantly, as they would then be better equipped to handle and approach conflicts. A common worry is that due to the way ethnic studies talks about race and that it teaches critical race theory, it will promote a divisive ideology to students. In reality, being exposed to differing views and backgrounds from their own helps build empathy and cultural awareness and acceptance. Instead of dividing students by the color of their skin, ethnic studies brings them together by acknowledging their differences and finding strengths within them. Many people fear critical race theory because they only see it as painting white people as villains, which is not what it is. Ethnic studies, at its core, is about communicating. It is about empathy, understanding other perspectives, learning how to actively listen to others, advancing honest inquiry, and connection. HF 29 is an attempt to ignore history. To deny students ethnic studies is to deny students an accurate representation of themselves and their education.
Thank you. And we have some others.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, go ahead and proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Luisa Gaona, and I'm a senior at the University of Minnesota studying Chicano and Latino Studies and American Studies. I'm here today because ethnic studies gave me back something that was stolen from me: my history, my identity, my sense of belonging. Without it, I wouldn't be standing here before you fighting for something that should never be up for debate. I come from deep roots that stretch across borders through generations of struggle and resilience. My ancestors fought to exist in a world that tried to erase them, and yet they survived. They worked the fields, organized for justice, built communities with their bare hands. They carried stories, songs, traditions, pieces of themselves, the history erased. And because school never taught me who they were, I grew up believing they were not worth remembering. I was raised in a predominantly white school where my culture was not just ignored, it was absent. My name was difficult to pronounce, my history unimportant. I learned about the founding fathers, but not about the indigenous nations they displaced. I learned about the Civil War, but not about the Mexican-American soldiers who fought alongside the Union. I learned about World War II, but not about the braceros who fed this country while soldiers were away. The history of people who looked like me was not part of my education, and so I grew up believing it was not part of this country. So I tried to erase myself. I changed the way I spoke. I let them mispronounce my name. I sat in silence as history was thought like my people were never here. And that silence grew inside me, and it became loneliness, resentment, and shame. Then I found ethnic studies. For the first time, I was given the language to understand what I had felt my whole life. I learned about the Chicano movement, the Brown Berets, the women who fought to reclaim our voices. I learned that we have always been here and that our presence is legacy. I found professors who looked like me, who spoke the words I have always needed to hear, and I found myself. Ethnic studies did not just educate me. It gave me the strength to stand taller, to speak louder, to take back what has always been mine. It is why I want to pursue a PhD in Chicano and Latino studies so that I can teach future generations the histories that I was never taught. So that no student has to grow up feeling invisible in their own education. HF 29 would take that away. It would ensure that generations of students grow up never seeing themselves reflected in their learning, never knowing the power of their own existence. It would continue a cycle of silence that has lasted for too long. But the consequences of historical erasure extend beyond the classroom and individual students. History is not just about the past, it shapes the present and future. When we erase history, we erase accountability. We erase the lessons that could prevent injustice from repeating themselves. We create a society that does not understand the roots of inequality, that cannot recognize systemic oppression.
Thank you, and go ahead and introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Hi, my name is Rena Curtis. I'm a senior in high school, and I, a white kid from the Midwest, need ethnic studies. I sincerely hope this is not the case, but I'm here today in case the white people in this room need a white person to look them in the eye and tell them that ethnic studies is important. When I graduate from high school in June, I am leaving my school and my younger sister at a terrifying time for education when the Department of Education itself is in a precarious situation. If this bill passes today, if you allow this bill to pass today, we will be back to 2012's social studies curriculum. I don't think anyone in this room can confidently say that that would be a good thing. Myself, my graduating class, and every teacher and student in this room, and everyone who has testified in opposition to HF 29, would like to go to sleep tonight knowing that the comprehensive education that we deserve is not shut down by the people who are supposed to support and represent us. Before you vote today, I ask you to reflect on the values that inspire you to be a representative for your community. Do you value knowledge? Do you value a child's right to education? Do you value a child's right to understand their history and prepare for their future? I sincerely hope your answer is yes. But if your answer is no, I would appreciate, and I think we would all appreciate, if you said that with your chest. At the very least, the children, who you love to call the future, deserve to know who really values them and who does not. If your answer is yes to those questions, if you do value education, and if you do value our right to understand our futures and if you do in fact value our right to understand our histories and prepare for our futures, you have a responsibility in your role that you have gotten through your values in the seats that you hold today to reject HF 29. And I sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, hope that you reject it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anybody else? Go ahead and start
Good
with your
afternoon.
name. Proceed.
My name is Dr. Amelia Maria de la Luz Montes. I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Chicano and Latino Studies at the University of Minnesota. My PhD is in American literature, and I have a comparative studies degree as well. I have been teaching for 45 years, and this includes teaching high school. Even though my doctorate is in American literature, my comparative literature training has given me the opportunity to also teach courses in British, French, Swedish, Czech, and German, etc. literatures. I have taught all these courses alongside U.S., Latino, African American, American Indian, Asian writers, and my students are always, always excited to study the richness of their heritage, to tell me, why didn't I get this earlier? They become citizens of the world. All of these German, French, Czech, Swiss, Chicano, Latino, African American, American Indian, Asian American writings, etc., inform and enrich who we are, where we come from, our heritage, so that we may better understand ourselves and each other. Students of all backgrounds take our courses. There they learn the cultural competency they will need to be successful in a global workforce. And this is why I say that HF 29 is an attack on all our sons and daughters, all our students. Removing ethnic studies limits all our students from the opportunity to learn all the histories and cultures that are present in this state and in this country. Teaching ethnic studies for all strengthens our communities, our state, our country. HF 29 is a major slide backwards in the global cultural competence that all students need to acquire. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And I believe, all right, we're good to go. So let's go on now. Now we'll close public testimony. And thank you for those additional, sorry for the confusion, not sure. Well, anyway, we will move on to members. Any questions, discussion? Representative Bierman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Kresha, I just wanted to ask this, the recent testifier there just commented about this being a backsliding and teaching based on 2012 issues. And I just want to ask you as an educator, and knowing that things progress and we learn more about education, we learn more about how students learn, we have a growing number of people of minorities in this state, and the importance of them seeing, as people have described repeatedly here today, how important it is to see them and understand who they are. Does that give you any pause with this bill, Rep. Kresha?
Go ahead, Representative
Thank you.
Kresha.
And Representative Bierman, right? Bierman, excuse me. So as I opened up, the students in Minnesota deserve the fundamental right to a quality education measured with academic standards. Your question, I would ask, what in this bill suggests that any teacher would go back and teach in retro? There's nothing in the bill that does that. What is in this bill that we are so afraid of? I'm just reducing a mandate from the state. I'm not at all suggesting the teachers go one way or the other. So my question to you is, what is the fear that, is the fear that suddenly teachers are going to see this and go back to some teaching that that is all wrong? I don't see that happening. What in this bill suggests that teachers would do that?
Representative Bierman.
One of the things that we're seeing is this push against DEI, which I'm hearing, from, people indoors when I was campaigning, and also, from the administration at a federal level. And I think the orders to schools to eliminate that and to remove it is also a harbinger of moving towards laws like in Florida, where they have removed the DEI, removed teaching ethnic principles or ethnic studies and classes. And so it's a restriction at the grand level. And I think that this bill, as many people have referred to it, is a retraction of that and a closing the possibilities of it. And so that's one of the things that I see, is that it's more or less a holistic effort to restrict and to teach what is called American history in a very narrow sense. And that concerns me.
Representative Kresha.
Representative Bierman, I don't share that. I think whatever's happening in Florida and other areas is not the impetus for this bill. You heard very articulate students here, incredibly articulate from both sides, and those students read well. They articulated them well, but the reality is 29% of their classmates cannot do that same thing. Cannot read at that grade level, cannot do the basic math, cannot have the same achievement. And when you get into income and disparities, kids fall off. We have to put front and center academic achievement for kids. The testimony was fantastic. And I would hope that every kid, every student, every young adult and into further adults would take that learning, build on it, and build their perspective and go. This bill does not hold anybody back. It does not tell any teachers what they cannot put in their classroom. It just simply removes the state mandate which says we have to tell you what to do. That to me that's very limiting. Why would we have to tell anybody what to do? Again, teachers will meet their students where they need to be. They will learn, they will find best practices, and they will evolve. And I'm very confident that I've seen teachers, I'm one of them, that has lost many hours of sleep over this. This bill is not about all these other movements. Let's not make it about it. This is about moving the fundamental right of students to have the opportunity for achievement. The state is failing at that.
Representative Bierman, follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one more question on it is, why would you get rid of the funding to develop the courses if the plan is not to stop schools that want to move from implementing them?
Representative Kresha.
Not one penny of that funding will go to the schools. That is all about a position at the Department of Education. This is already happening at the schools. Teachers are already teaching. They're already doing this. And I know some of that funding may flow down, but not much. I mean, go look at if I could ask nonpartisan staff, exactly how much money are we talking about?
Ms. Para or Mr. Strom? Ms. Para.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. The bill modifies 3 appropriations, one for ethnic studies consultation, so that went to the department. The other one was ethnic studies school grants for competitive grants to districts and charter schools, and that reduced the overall appropriation by $700,000. And then the third appropriation was $150,000 each year for an ethnic studies specialist at the Department of Education.
Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Thank you for clarifying. So the grants is what we're removing. That's not even enough to really make a difference. These teachers are already moving out, and they're already finding ways, and they're going to make this happen, I guarantee it. We do not need a state mandate. What we need to do is find ways to reallocate our dollars towards student achievement. That's where I'm at on this bill. Thank you for your question.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Rep. Kresha. I have a question for you. Well, one, I want to agree. I always say from my days on the school board that the students are always the smartest ones in the room. And they prove that again today. So I appreciate every student that came in. And thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing them and having their voice here. I think it has to always be at the center of our conversations because that's why we're all here on education policy, making these decisions. So my question to you is, I heard you just say that when you talk about standards, and standards is in here, and I know your belief of, I know you believe in standards, but I just want to hear a little bit more about what standards mean to you, because that seems to be at play with this bill and actually the next bill as well. So I would love to hear your thoughts on the importance of standards in our schools.
Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Green, for the question. So certainly standards are that which can guide us in how we're going to get to some type of achievement. I have lived through OBE, I have lived through graduation standards, I've lived through block scheduling, I've lived through about every great standards idea in education. And the reality is, teachers watch that come and go and they teach to their students. We grab a little bit of a nugget of everything that comes up, but everything that is mandated by the state, quite frankly, the teachers will find a better way to do that themselves. And I have found mandates to be more limiting than they are empowering. And so I look at standards as us thinking we're the state school board and that we know better, and so therefore we're going to push this down. I don't think we need to do that. I think that we should put our focus on academic achievement. Let's get these reading levels and math levels up. Let's give students the ability to really reach beyond the potential that they've been given to with this.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Green, follow up?
Nope, that's it.
Thank you. Who's Representative Keeler?
Thank you, Chair. I want to get into the nuts of the bill, right? Because I think that that's important. At the end of the day, we're making policy. I have a ton of comments I can make about the topic at hand, but I want to actually look at the bill. So when we talk about standards, I'm glad that you asked that question, because when you started, you talked about how important it is for our kids, you know, to be successful. And I know that I've worked a lot with Representative Bakeberg and Representative Lawrence. You're going to have to help me with the 3 R's. Bakeberg's not in the room to help us, but it's like rigor, relatability, relevance, right? I feel like this is a group team effort, right? But the point is that Representative Bakeberg talks a lot about that, and he's leaned into me and educated me on the importance of that. And I think the one thing I will say is that relevance is that what we learn is reflective of who's in the classrooms, and we know that Minnesota is a very diverse community. So I just want to put that out there. The other thing I'll say to the gentleman who made the comment about white not having the options to drop down for German or Irish or Norwegian, the reality is those drop downs are there is because we showed up and advocated for our people so that we were identified. If the Norwegians want to be part of the drop down box, go become a Norwegian activism group and come and add it as a drop-down box. That's what we did, right? That's what you can do. That's how, as Indigenous people, we fought for our own visibility. We did that. Nobody else showed up for us. So if the Norwegians and the Germans and the Irish and everybody else want to do that, I think that's great. I think everybody who can lean into their culture and where they're from is great, but I'm not going to go there. So my question for you is, you mentioned that this would be something that would be happening in PE. And I just want you to walk me through, because we all are learning, right, how this actually plays out. How would ethnic studies show up in physical education?
Representative Kresha.
Madam Chair, that's a great question. Thank you, Representative Kent. I don't know, and that's the problem. The way this is written, it has to go in there, and therefore it will have to find its way there. My point is, does it need to?
Go ahead, Representative.
Thanks. So I'm looking at the bill, and in line 3.29 to 3.32, you're striking out ethnic studies course may fulfill a social studies, language arts, arts, math, or science credit. There's nothing in this bill that even said ethnic studies would end up in PE, and so that's concerning. The other part that's concerning is that you just talked about standards, and when we look at 2.9 all the way to 2.24, those are all the other standards that we're looking at. We're not adjusting any of the other standards, but yet you're putting out what we just heard. If this bill goes into law, we would go back to the 2012 social studies standards, and what this bill does is you struck that we would move what the benchmark standards would be reevaluated. Originally, it was going to be in 2020 to 2022. What you pushed it out to is the 2030 to 2031. Do you feel like if this became policy and we went back to old standards, waiting that amount of time to review social studies standards and curriculum, do you think that that's an excessive amount of time?
Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Keeler. I think pushing this out will allow the teachers to continue to do what they're doing. This doesn't roll anything back that's already happening in the classroom. It's just a state mandate.
Keeler?
Thanks, that didn't answer my question. The question that I have is, in your bill, what you're changing, not around ethnic studies, because you're crossing out things and you're changing things in policy. So as we look at policy issues here, what this bill is doing is actually changing that our social studies standards would not be reviewed until 2030 and 2031. My question to you is, do you feel like that is a significant amount of time for us not to review standards because you're not addressing any of the other areas that technically ethnic studies could show up in? The only standards you're changing is the social studies standards. So I guess back to the first question, do you feel like that's an excessive amount of time to not review the social studies standards?
Representative Kresha.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Keeler. I feel this is the appropriate time. That's why I put it into the bill.
Thank you. Representative Keeler,
I would
follow-up?
argue that then we're leaning into, this is so much bigger than ethnic studies. Like, I get where you're at, right? And I know where you're at on this. I'm not going to argue the place of the bill.
You don't know where I'm at?
Where I'm at on this is that now you're eliminating standards for the entire social studies curriculum. It has nothing to do with just your ethnic studies issue area. It's the entire social studies curriculum that you're saying we don't need to review for 5 more years. We're not doing that in any of the areas. So just so that everybody knows, we do this on our physical health, where you said there could be an issue. We're actually gonna review that in the 26-27 school year. So I just think that, like, we're opening up a box that's much bigger than just the ethnic studies by the changes in here. And when we make simple changes in policy, it has unintended consequences in many different areas. And I just think that this bill has areas that we need to be more cautious about, because it's gonna have, it would, if it would ever become law, would actually have negative impacts across many other areas that don't even impact the ethnic studies conversation. So I think we need to be cautious of that as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Representative Jordan. His final comments?
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Madam Chair, also for making sure that people who needed to testify got that out there. And Representative Kresha, I'm just going to say something broad. Feel free to address it in your closing comments or don't. But I think I'm really thinking about what you said to open up this bill, which is about listen to teachers and trust. You said trust your teachers. Well, the teachers are not asking for this bill. They testify, like the Minnesota Council for the Social Studies, which are the teachers that teach social studies, testified against this bill. The other thing I think we need to keep in mind is that the reason this bill passed last year and became law that we have ethnic studies is because this was a student-led bill. And the students showed up today and are continuing to ask for this. And they talk, I'm glad that we all agree that our students are impressive. But what I heard students say is that the reason they felt this confident to be able to participate in social studies in action, I think many of us sitting around the table probably had social studies as our favorite subject in school. I certainly did. Really are asking for this and are saying that this is what helps me be someone who participates in government, that knows that the Capitol is my house, where I get to come and say my opinions and I matter as much as anyone with a fancy title, but it just matters that I'm here as a social studies student, as a 17-year-old. I think that's powerful, and I think that's really why Representative Sensenbrenner passed this bill and why these students pushed for so many years to make sure that they could find themselves in their textbooks and in their lessons so that they could excel at reading, so they could excel at math. This is the underpinning of the math and the English and maybe PE, I don't know. But this is something that's important, and so I will ask for a roll call. My understanding is that this is going to your committee next and that people will be examining this in more detail. So that's that. Looking forward to the vote.
Thank you, Lead Jordan. And we will go through that roll call, but I would like to give Representative Kresha opportunity to close.
So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the members of the committee for the discussion. We had testimony on both sides here, and I think we have to recognize that. The reality is we have failing academic standards and achievement across the state. We have students that are being left behind, that are falling through the achievement gap, and we have to start somewhere. We have placed so many mandates in the school that have burdened them and the teachers and the classrooms, the communities. We have got in the middle. If you really listen to Representative Baker and some of the other things, he also talks about how often the state gets in the middle between the classroom, the teacher, and the students. That's what I'm asking us to do, is to start looking at those mandates. We're going to have to pull something back. We can't do both. We can't continue to put all this weight in the schools and accept these abysmal rates. We had some great testimony, and the young woman who testified, the lawyer, and when she talked about her passion and how she will define her kids and teach her culture, we need to listen to those voices as well. Because they are telling us, as a state, you do not need to do my job. And so with that, I would ask for your support on the bill, and I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. A roll call vote has been requested. There will be a roll call. The Committee Legislative Assistant will take the roll. Oh, what? Oh, excuse me. We need to renew the motion. I'm sorry. Still a little bit new at this. The Chair renews her motion to refer House File 29 to the Committee on Education Finance.
Chair Bennett.
Aye.
Vice Chair Mueller.
Mueller votes yes.
Lead Jordan.
No.
Bierman.
Bierman, no.
DePel.
Aye.
Falconer.
No.
Fogelman.
Yes.
Gordon.
Aye.
Green.
No.
Hill.
Hill votes no.
Keeler.
Keeler, no.
Lawrence.
Yes.
Roach.
Yes.
All right, there being 7 in favor and 6 against, the motion prevails, and House File 29 is re-referred to Education Finance.